Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Cody, and we're keeping it geekly with our new guest, Gary Moloney. We're here to break down When the Blood Has Dried from Mad Cave Studios and everything in between. I had a chance to read this. This thing was phenomenal. Phenomenal. I just loved how graphic it was, but also like endearing. It felt like the relationship between the protagonist and her friend was just like phenomenal. I thought that was really well crafted. I mean, Gary, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Well, thanks very much, Cody, and thanks for the kind words. It's always, great, gratifying when you've been making things in a vacuum for a long time for people to see it and get it out there, and for people to respond to it. So, thanks very much for the kind words. I'm glad the book worked for you.
We have Captain B-Dub and Rapid Fire Reviews both in chat. I guess I was shooting myself in the foot. It shows the Twitter emblem from the Twitter, so I guess Twitter does translate over to Restream. Welcome both of you to the stream. Let me go ahead. We're going to be dropping a link to pre-order Cover A from Mad Cave Studios. The final cutoff date on this is March 10th. This is going to be in stores April 10th, so make sure you hit the links. And if you're unable to pre-order, simply putting this on Facebook, Twitter, anywhere where you could drop links helps tremendously. Word of mouth is free. It costs you nothing to do. And the power of social media is awesome. Gary, you have a pretty awesome list of things you've worked on, from Lens, Turning Roads. You were also, I might be mistaken, curator of Mixtape?
Yeah. So Mixtape was the very first book I put out. So I started making comics, seriously, back in 2017 and 2018, when after years of dabbling and flirting with the idea, I really just had to put my money where my mouth was, and I decided that I'd commit myself to learning the craft of creating comics. So the plan was, or the goal was, that every month I'd put together a 4-page short story. I'd find an artist, work with them, hire them to get it done, and I'd put it out so that people could tell me it's good, tell me it's bad, tell me it's everything in between. But just learn from doing and learn from failing and failing faster. And the ultimate idea was that, well, after a year of doing that, I'll have X amount of stories and I'll be able to put them out into a collection. And that collection was Mixtape, which we published through a comics collective I set up with Paul Carroll and Garrett Luby throughout that year, Limit Break Comics, where we wanted to kind of support each other's books and push each other towards making better books and better stories. So that was the Mixtape was the first one that we put out through that process. And since then we've done these big mythology anthologies that kind of mash up a particular genre with, a classic, form of mythology. So we did Turning Roads, which was Irish folklore and science fiction, Down Below, which was Greek mythology and noir crime fiction, and then most recently Fractured Realms, which was Norse mythology and horror. And we just at the moment on Kickstarter are funding Wish Upon a Star, which is our latest of those folklore mythology anthologies that deals with fairy tales, classic fairy tales in a far distant future setting. So that was the kind of indie process of learning how to make comics, was putting together these short story collections, learning it through expanding it into longer stories, and then ultimately curating and helping to edit this line of mythology anthologies.
Well, you were also awarded Best Irish Anthology by ICN in 2018 for that as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, that's true. It was really kind of gratifying for the first.
Yeah, that had to have felt amazing.
I mean, the Irish comics community is very tight knit. We all kind of support each other's work. On the basis that the rising tide will raise every boat. But and because there's such a strong creative community, there's a bit of competitiveness involved. So everyone's putting out their work, trying to one-up each other in a sense, but in a friendly way. So because the ICN is something that's voted on by your peers too and by the community, it was really kind of gratifying and a lovely thing that for the first book I put out to get that recognition from Irish Comics News and from the community as a whole. So it was really kind of it made me think that, oh wait, no, I'm actually doing something right. I'm not just and going by the seat of my pants. Something is connecting here. So I at least someone else is telling me that, and it's not just my ego confirming that.
I don't know how I'm doing it, but I'm doing it.
Exactly. Well, that's it. You don't know until you try, and you'll only refine it by taking chances. And sometimes you're going to fail when you take those chances, but you learn from it.
So let's go ahead and start talking about When the Blood Has Dried. This is, I love the art in it, the lettering. Can we talk a little bit about the creative team and how you went about forming it?
Yeah, so this is, as you say, a gorgeous book that I work on with Daniel Romero, who's my co-creator and the artist on the book, and Becca Carey, who's a letterer extraordinaire, works in all the Massiverse books for Image Comics, has worked for pretty much every company under the sun at this stage, and is really prolific. And the way that team came about was that Daniel was one of the first people that I worked with in comics. So in the mixtape days, Daniel and I met up on a comics forum that was about, it was very much kind of a comics matchmaking forum where writers who were looking for artists or vice versa could, put themselves out there, say, I have a project, it's 4 pages, anyone interested, what's your page rates and things like that. And Daniel and I connected through that, but instantly we realized we had very similar storytelling sensibilities, and that we tended to like the same things. Like, we were both big fans of manga. We liked Full Metal Alchemist. We liked different approaches to works. So I did a short story with Daniel for Mixtape, which I really enjoyed. Like, one of the ones that I still think is very, 5 years later, 6 years later, I still, think is a really good story, and, connected the two of us together. And after that, we had a kind of a standing arrangement where we said that if there was an anthology coming up that we could pitch to, that we would do it together, and ultimately with the view one day to try to pitch something larger, to go to the direct market, to go to a creator-owned publisher and try to get our work out there. Because we knew that we just got on well and that we worked well together. So after a couple of years doing smaller projects, the essential idea for When the Blood Has Dried, this idea of a fantasy western that focuses on a retired adventurer who has tried to escape their past life of violence and to live a more peaceful existence, who gets dragged back into it and finds that you can't ever really run away from your past. It always comes back to find you in some way, and you have to learn to live with the weight of everything you've done. And that means sometimes, accepting that you won't get forgiveness or redemption, but figuring out a way to live in spite of those things. So that idea came about after I was first exposed to the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop role-playing. And I went to Daniel with the idea and was like, well, I went to Daniel with a number of ideas, but this was kind of at the top of my list. I was like, I really hope Daniel goes for this idea. Like, there was a couple of other ones where I thought he might like this, but this was the one I hope he was going for. And he instantly, when I presented him with the list of like, well, we can work on these pitches, he goes, no, that one. The one about the adventurer.
And you're just like
that idea.
Yes.
Yes. Because you never know what's going to click with someone. But so from that point, we knew we had our plan. We were going to work together. Becca Carey then came in later. So Becca is someone who's a dear friend who lived in Ireland for many, many years and was part of the same Irish comics creating community that I was part of, has since moved to Canada, but was a very good friend and a really talented letterer. So I wanted to, because so much of this book tries to give a more Irish, influenced or more Irish tonally influenced approach to high fantasy, I wanted to have that in the creative team as much as possible. So Daniel is from Chile, and then Becca, being an incredibly talented letterer, someone who I wanted to work with, this just seemed like the perfect project for her. And she'd also done a number of projects where she'd been dealing with high fantasy. So she did a run on Vampirella Red Sonja, where she had a really kind of interesting approach to letters, and that was one of the projects that made me realize, actually, I think she'd be a really good fit for this book. And so that's how the team came together, and we just spent a couple of years, workshopping it, making sure that the pitch document was where it needed to be in order to get it over the line, that the pages and the story itself was as strong as it could be, before we went to a publisher and asked them to take a shot on us as a newer creative team who hadn't worked into the direct market before.
And I was talking about this backstage, but now that we're live, I'll say it again. I really loved how the beginning introduction to this book is just darker palettes. I stole the images, the preview images from Mad Cave Studios pre-order site. And we have them up on an image slideshow so everyone can see it. It's just those beginning images, how dark the palettes are, how like, I wouldn't say grimy, but like just it has that heavy atmosphere like overlaying everything. It was just chef kiss. I mean, was that intentional, or is that something that was more of a collaboration with the artist?
Everything is ultimately a collaboration with the artist. Like, Daniel and I spoke at length throughout this creative process as to what was the feel we wanted for the book. And in a way, we tell kind of two parallel stories in the series. So one of the frameworks that we have for the book is that each issue begins with a cold open like that, a short, flashback where you see the life that Meabh, our main character, used to live. This life of violence, this life where she was, a glorified mercenary under the guise of being an adventurer, in inverted commas. And that by design, those would have to be tonally different from the modern and present day part of the story. One, to just make it very, very clear there are two different timelines, but also because Meabh is at a different point in her life. She's in a darker place in those flashbacks. But as we go to the present day storyline, we have much brighter colors because she's happy with herself for her first time in a long, long time. She has this piece that she didn't have before. And so we juxtapose those two things, and it allows us to storytell and give you more insight, even if you don't, aren't consciously aware of it at the time, as to, when things are going bad, when this darker side of Meabh is coming out, we use very harsh red tones. And when she's in a more kind of peaceful situation, when she's, at ease and is, enjoying the life that she's managed to establish for himself, well, we go for brighter colors. And so over the course of the series, the juxtaposition between the two, the shifting between the lighter colors and the darker colors, tells you where we're going and tells you, how far Meabh is descending back to that violent person that she was, and that she really doesn't want to be again. The central conflict of this book is that, can she keep a hold of this, new life she's built for herself, when all this influence from her past life is re-emerging and really trying to bring her back to that place she was before. And it's about whether you could ever really get over that, or whether you have to figure out a way to deal with those things and, move past them.
I really love that, and I love how you'll be balancing it back and forth too. It wasn't kind of just like a one and done. Another thing I really loved is how you had the title pop up in that bottom part. It was such a strong like abstract to the panels behind it. It's like just the title in white and everything is just dark and bloodied. It was phenomenal. We have rapid fire review saying this is going to be contender for best issue of the year. I honestly had a blast with this, and I really loved how you crafted Maeve's personality too. We see her as very highly capable of handling herself in the first couple pages, but then just the person she wants to become outside of that, and the way you scripted just her personality, and to give someone of this level like humor and hope like that, like the way you constructed her was just phenomenal, and I give you high praise for that, Gary. It was she's a very strong protagonist. I really love Fergus as well. Her little friend, like I thought he's like the perfect companion, like the perfect like opposite to her character.
Yeah, I think that I love writing Fergus. I think Fergus is, obviously you like writing your protagonist, but Fergus, who's kind of Maeve's confidant and best friend, who helps her run the pub that she now is in charge of in this rural community. They're the buddy cops with each other. They play off each other. And Meabh, while she can be funny and while she can be, very sincere when she wants to be, as we see throughout the first issue, is a person of, few enough words. When she speaks, it has meaning, because for a lot of times she just is insular in her own thoughts. And it's Fergus who is the quick talker, making jokes the whole time, slagging people, mocking them, the whole thing. So it's a nice, mix and a nice, dynamic to play with, to have this person who's very reserved and someone who's, you know, very extroverted and constantly making jokes at like the whole time. But yeah, I think one of the as much as, you know, obviously I appreciate the compliment, I think about, you know, Maeve's characterization, I think so much of that comes down to Daniel's work on the book as well, because a lot of the way we convey Maeve's character is in the glances. You know, Maeve being you know, a few words a lot of time, and being you know, insular and not often wanting to, you know, speak out directly or speak exactly what she's thinking. You know, you figure out what she's thinking and you figure out her views on things through these moments of silence, and it's something that we intentionally built into the book, very much inspired by the likes of Cowboy Bebop, where some of the most memorable scenes in that show are those introspective moments where the characters are sharing a cigarette on the ship, or they're looking out over a landscape and just contemplating everything that's happened to them. And so we kind of build those moments of rest into the book and give Maeve that time to reflect and to consider everything that has happened to her. And I think the reason, the reason why Maeve comes across as being so empathetic in parts and being, you know, open and interesting, I think a lot of that comes down to Daniel's character acting, because I think that is he's great at a lot of things, but I think one of his biggest strengths is being able to sell you on what a character is thinking, even when they're not saying anything.
I love that. And I mean, let's talk when they are saying something. The dialogue in this was really interesting. I love how you weren't afraid to cuss in it. And I loved how it wasn't overdone. It felt like just like the perfect amount of banter you would see between two friends, like just like poking fun at each other. And like the way the dialogue was slanged. I guess that's the proper way. It's like the slang they kind of have too. If you want to give us a little bit about that, I just love how the dialogue was in this.
Yeah, I when it comes to dialogue and the kind of the accents the characters have and the slang that they have, you know, a lot of that comes from this Carraig and Bhun, which is the village or the town that this is set in for the most part, is based on my experiences growing up in small towns, rural areas of Ireland, which have a very particular, you know, cadence, a very particular way of speaking, and a lot of it. And because I was trying to get across this idea of because so much of high fantasy is inspired by the British tradition. You know, I was trying to take an Irish approach to high fantasy, in the same way that books like Savage Town or Bog Bodies from Declan Shalvey take the crime drama and look at it through an Irish lens. I was trying to do that with the high fantasy setting that we had here. So I'm a big fan of writing dialogue. It's one of the things I like most about the process. For me, it has to have a particular rhythm. And when writing dialogue, it's almost like meters in poetry or in song. You know, you'll figure out how if it's right or not by the way it sounds and by the way it plays on the page when you break it down into the panels. And you can feel, in the same way that when you can hear a song when it's off key, you can feel when there's too many panels here, or there's not enough panels here, or if this dialogue would work better as part of one panel or split across two. So a lot of my process is trying to work that out on the page and to figure out how it's going to play out on the beats, and the cadence of the dialogue, whether it's someone like Maeve, who very much is speaking, you know, in what I would describe as kind of an Irish dialect, or a dialect that is to like Hiberno English, or it's Fergus, who speaks, you know, very much with a kind of Scottish inflection towards a lot of his phrases. And then you have other characters who are more posh, you know, they're fancy, and their language and their types of words reflect that. But I really enjoyed writing the dialogue, and I think it's all about trying to figure out how it sounds and the rhythms to it on the page.
So the title is very, very striking, very strong. Where did you come up with it?
So when the Blood Has Dried, you know, as a title, first of all, I like the longer titles in comics. You know, you have things like Al Ewing is great at this, you know, we only find them when they're dead and things like that. But because this book has the flavor of a spaghetti western, those tend not to be 1 or 2 word titles. Those tend to be phrases. So, there will be blood or things like that. But more importantly, the title reflects what this story is about. This is a story about someone who has come to the end of their journey. Meabh was an adventurer. She was a mercenary in that sense, but that time of her life has passed.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about picking up with her at a later stage in your life, after the bodies are buried and after the blood has dried. And, when after the blood has dried, it's a lot harder to get it out. If you're trying to, if you've got the blood stain on your clothes, it's harder to wash it out once it's really ingrained in there. But it was about, there's the thematic element of it, that it's about something that happens after someone retires from a life of violence. But also, I think those kind of titles are ones I like in fiction most. A lot of the fantasy novels that I like, Joe Abercrombie's first Law series, has those longer titles that, yes, tell you something about, the story, but also have a kind of a greater meaning behind them.
I love that, and I love how it cycles back to the meaning of the story. It's harder to go back once it's dried. It's perfect how it just works in union, and that's why I wanted to ask, because it's such a strong and distinct title, and it is a little bit longer, but it flows so perfectly. Now, backstage, we were talking, and you mentioned this was going to be 5 issues. Where could we see Meabh potentially go in this series?
So, as a 5-issue series, and it was always pitched as 5 issues, there's a lot of talk these days about books that are designed to be ongoing, but they get cut. This is always designed to be a 5-issue story with a beginning, middle, and end. That's not to say there's other places in this world we could go, but
Mm-hmm.
Meabh's story is self-contained. The story we want to tell is in those 5 issues, and really, the journey that Meabh has to go on in this series is, when confronted with her past, having attempted to bury it for so long, and when presented with an opportunity to, slip back into that part of herself, to slip back into her more violent tendencies, does she accept that part of herself, and reject the guild that betrayed her and left her for dead? Or does she seek to rebel against that, to really hold on tight to this new life that she's built for herself? But in holding on tight, is she going to, to crush it in the process? Can she ever really go back to the life she has now made for herself after all this stuff about her past life comes to light? And so she has to grapple with that, and also grapple with what she's willing to sacrifice in order to keep that life she's built for herself, and whether in doing so that's going to cause more harm than good, and more harm than good to herself as well as those around her.
I love that. So everyone watching, right here is the link. Be sure to get your pre-orders, and the final cutoff is next week, March 10th, and then it'll be dropping in stores April 10th, so not too far from now. Where are you at with issue 2? I know issue 1 is complete. What's the progress with the second issue?
So we've been working on this for the last year. So we have 3 complete issues done, ready to go.
Whoa!
And Danny, we're just finishing up issue 4. So there's no fear that this is a book that's going to be oh, where's issue 2 or anything like that. The majority of the hard work has been done, and people can be reassured of that. So once issue 1 is in stores, issue 2, issue 3, issue 4 will swiftly follow after that on a monthly basis.
And that is awesome. So outside of When the Blood Has Dried, are you working on any other series or any other anthologies?
Yeah, so we're working away on different things the whole time. The main thing we're focusing on at the moment is Wish Upon a Star, which is the Limerick Break Comics Kickstarter that I have going on with Paul Carroll, my co-editor in the book. That's the fairy tale, far future science fiction anthology I referenced earlier. So that's funding now, and it'll be funding for all of March. So people can have a look at that. We have a brilliant cover from Nate Stockman and Deacon Uff that reflects the mix of genres that we are exploring and the mix of ideas that we're exploring in that book. So that's the main focus, and it's between that and When the Blood Has Dried. There's only so many hobs that you can put on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
pots you can put on the hob before the water starts to boil over. So you have to you have to know your limits in that sense. But no, what I'm really excited is to for people to see When the Blood Has Dried and get that into their hands, having had to keep it under wraps for an entire year, and now finally be able to speak to people about it and get their reactions, and also just to continue this series of mythology anthologies we've been doing with Limit Break that have just been going from strength to strength every year.
And I love those too. Those sound like a whole lot of fun. We have BMD Nerd over on YouTube stopping to say some great anthologies this guy has put together, especially Down Below.
Oh, that Down Below, which was the Greek mythology noir crime one, is like one of my personal favorite projects I've worked on, because outside of doing When the Blood Has Dried, I never thought I'd go back to writing high fantasy. High fantasy was something that I enjoyed writing as a teenager, but I was never able to tell the kind of story I wanted. And so I kind of moved away from high fantasy into more urban fantasy, and then eventually just to straight up crime stories. And so Down Below was my love letter to the genre in that sense, and that I got to really focus on, well, what is cool about the crime genre, and what interesting things can you tell through that lens, and also seeing how much that there's actually a thematic crossover with the Greek tragedy, and also with noir crime stories. That there's this bittersweetness against rebelling against a system that will always win in the end.
I love that.
That was a fun project. But as much as I said, as much as When the Blood Has Dried is a fantasy story, it's totally a Western. This is really about someone who has left a criminal gang and finds out that that's not as easily done as one thinks. So it's a fantasy Western, it's fantasy noir. That's the kind of thing that we're going for. So I've never really strayed away from crime. I've just dressed it up in fancier clothing.
I love it. I can't wait to see what you come out with in the future. You have it feels like such a strong knack for just putting together these like crazy ideas and morphing like such outstanding stories.
Oh no, I appreciate that man. I think a lot of the times when it comes to genre or when we think about a genre, really what we're thinking about is a setting, and it's the other parts of the story that make it unique. So we talk about Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire as a fantasy story, but really it's a political thriller. And we talk about The Winter Soldier as a superhero movie, but that's just the trappings. It's really a spy movie.
Yeah.
So it's those are the kind of things that I like examining, because I think when you combine two genres or two seemingly different conceptual ideas, I think that tells you a lot about that genre and this kind of stories you tell in that genre, rather than just serving up the vanilla version of it.
No, I love that, and I think that is phenomenal. So everyone who is watching, right here is the link one last time. Be sure to check it out. Be sure to share it wherever you can. Word of mouth always is 100% free. It is about time for us to begin wrapping things up. But before I let you go, Gary, I always love ending the show on a strong note, and that's where I get to ask you for a piece of advice and what you're doing outside of creating. So for anyone looking to just get started with script writing, we'll keep it easy. What would be your biggest piece of advice to help them get started, started on the right foot with it?
I think the best advice I can give people is do short stories and complete them. Start with a 4-pager, start with less if you want, and finish them and put them out there. Because so many people will start with the magnum opus, the big long 10-issue, 20-issue series that they want. And more often than not, well, one, you're not going to get the chance to tell that story out the gate. So you have to hone your craft, and you have to show people you can produce material. And the only way to do that is to do short things and put them out there. But also, you're probably not, when you're starting off, you're probably not creatively ready to tell the bigger story. And through telling the smaller stories, by learning the process and learning the craft through that, when opportunity knocks and you get a chance to tell that larger story, you're more likely to be ready for it. So that would be the big piece of advice that I would give. Start small, get them done, show them to people, get them out there, and from there you can expand. And
then you learn the beats. You learn how hone that the script writing skill a little bit sharper. So when you do come out with that magnus opus, it's a little bit tighter than it probably would have been starting out.
Exactly. You know, you have to learn the chords before you can play a song.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So, what are you up to outside of creating? You know, or do you play video games? What books are you reading? What TV shows have you been watching? You know, let the listeners know what you've been up to.
So yeah, I read a lot of books. I think books at the moment, and TV shows, video games as well. Like, you know, I consume media and things like that. Video games at the moment, I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3. My partner got me a Steam Deck for Christmas, so I've just been, the two of us have been going through Baldur's Gate 3 cooperative campaign. So we've been slowly chipping away at that every now and then. In terms of TV shows, I'd recommend. I just finished watching season 2 of The Bear, and I think The Bear is one of the best shows I've seen in a long time. Like, it's very tightly written. You know, it's one of those things where you watch and you come out of going, God, I wish I could write half as well as that, because the characters feel so authentic in terms of the way they speak to each other, in a way that I think sometimes, you know, you try to emulate how people speak in real life and you end up with just pastiches. But like, when you're watching The Bear, you feel like this is, you know, you're almost getting a camera, security camera footage from the inside of a high-paced restaurant lifestyle, and the language reflects that, the way that they treat each other reflects that. So The Bear is the TV show I'd recommend people to watch. And in terms of books, I just finished reading last night the Dark Knights of Steel series from DC, which was it's Tom Taylor's reinterpretation of, you know, the Justice League and the DC characters in a high fantasy medieval setting. So it's a 12-issue maxi series, and I really dug that. So I think those would be the things I'd recommend for people. The Bear on TV, and give Dark Knights of Steel a shot. I've
seen a couple clips of The Bear, and it gives me anxiety. I used to be a third shift grill cook for Denny's, so I'd get the drunk bar rush, and like I'd hear the ticket going off, and it just took me back to those days, and I'm like, not again.
But I think that's the reason why it works, is because like so many people have had that experience, you know, where one of your jobs is, you know, working in a kitchen, so you understand that stress. Like, I started watching it just after I finished reading Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential, so it was like the perfect pairing. In that sense of going, oh yeah, this is exactly how he described it. So that's probably a good pairing as well. It is very stressful, so I don't think it's one of those things where you go, we're going to sit down, we're going to relax tonight with an episode of The Bear. But if you're in the right mindset for it, I just think it's a wonderful piece of work that they put together on that series.
I love it. So thank you so much for swinging by and talking to us about not only this book, but your history as a creator as well. Everyone watching, thank you all for hanging out with us and chatting. I hope you all have a lovely Tuesday. Most importantly, guys, keep it geekly.